What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence. I am Jack Allen. So today I said this last time, but one of my favorite authors. If you actually, my first episode, I do not recommend you go listen to it, but it was off this man's book, Don Jeffries. Don, thanks for coming back on the show. And how are you doing today?
Oh, pleasure to be here, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I know I tell you that all the time. If you looked back at our old episodes, that intro is probably the same exact thing I said every time. But I do mean
I,
it when I say that your books
I
are
can't
awesome.
protest against that. Who doesn't like to hear those kind of nice things?
Well, first, there's so many things to talk about. I would love to hear your opinion on, but I saw your most recent tweet was about the UAP Congress meeting, and I would love to hear what your thinkings are on the whole thing.
Well, when I was back a wayward youth many decades ago, next to the JFK assassination, my number two seed as far as books that I was reading constantly would be about UFOs, UFOs, or Bermuda Triangle, Pyramid Tower, Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, all that stuff. Cryptos,
Right.
I was really into that stuff. Charles Ford later. But so I'm very familiar with the literature, and one day I'll probably write a book on this, mysterious phenomenon too. But I'm so familiar with that. I understand how people who had seen, and I'm talking about probably millions of people around the world who've seen these crafts. I don't believe
Interesting.
from outer. I haven't believed for a long time from outer space, but they're real. Definitely seeing something, and so it's a phenomenon. But they were ridiculed. They were scoffed at. They're much like we see whistleblowers in politics. A lot of many times their families scorned them. Their marriages broke up. They were left with physical injuries many times, strange burns and things because these craft. A lot
Mhm.
of times that's part of it, and it's undeniable. But so in the last couple of years, suddenly a story comes out in the New York Times. I think 2019, something like that, and suddenly giving this subject credibility out of nowhere. And now they're looking at videos that the pilots and the military took, which pilots in the military have been taking videos of these things for decades. They scoffed at them and made fun of them. The Air Force covered it up. Now suddenly they're giving this credibility. It's on Tucker Carlson all the time. Now Congress is having hearings about it. Obviously my spidey sense is going off. My radar's up. I don't believe for a second that they suddenly came to a belated realization that maybe we shouldn't have made fun of those guys. But I'm familiar. I'm familiar with Project Bluebeam. I'm familiar, with the idea of a fake alien invasion. So I hope they're not planning that. But they've thrown everything else at us in the last couple of years. So a fake alien invasion wouldn't really surprise me that much. And I think they may be cooking that up.
So I think we're on the same. I was just like you. Aliens were like what brought me into. I mean, who doesn't love the aliens and Bigfoot?
Sure.
And I mean, that is like, and that's the fun stuff. Like you get a lot of people that are like conspiracy curious with that. That's like a good. But so when you said you don't believe in them anymore, what did you mean by that?
No, I don't believe that they're extraterrestrial. I haven't for a long time. I believe they're definitely real.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there are some kind of phenomenon, but again, knowing what I know in terms of how the elite operate, and because you look at the reports, and again, I had a book called The Humanoids, which is a great compilation of encounters, probably written about 1980 or so,
Okay.
of people who had had close encounters. And actually, I was more interested in that than just people that saw lights. Because
Hmm.
they can always explain that as the planet Venus, which they usually did
Right. Right.
nonsensically.
Right.
but
Totally agree.
but it's a little harder when your people are telling you they're interacting with these creatures. And most of the time, the more often than not, the creatures were human beings. They just described regular looking guys, but they just came in this strange craft. And a lot of times they spoke English, well. But so well, what's going on here? But the the overall agenda was pretty clear, where they were constantly stressing when they did see these creatures. There was an overriding emphasis, like what you saw in the movie "The Day the Earth Stood Still" in 1951, of human, we're dangerous. Our nuclear weapons are dangerous. We're going to blow the planet up. So we're here to lecture you. Earthlings must stop war. And so that was whether they're trying to get America to disarm. I don't know, but so I suspect if anybody saw these creatures today, they'd probably be warning about climate change. I'm guessing. You know, So I think it's a politically correct message. So the message was just too, it was too constant, and the fact that they always appeared to like people in remote locations, so they could, people wouldn't necessarily believe them. And but again, I believe that they saw something, but again, I think it was a part of some giant psyop, and I think it's my point is being proven now because nothing has changed to make them suddenly take this stuff seriously. But we know about Project Bluebeam, which actually doesn't involve just a fake alien invasion. Project Bluebeam also involves a mock second coming of Christ, which you ought to fear more than that.
Wait, what did you say? What is it? What does it also have? What did you say?
It involves a mock second coming of Jesus Christ as
No
well.
way.
Yep, and we know the CIA already really seriously considered doing that in the early 1960s. There was a project that seriously considered having a giant hologram of Jesus Christ to
No
be
way.
shown outside the shores of Cuba. Cuba is a very Catholic country, and
Right.
they thought that was one way to control them. So they didn't do it, but this is one of the projects they were considering. So I think they incorporated all that into Project Bluebeam. I don't think they would do that. I think they're more likely to do the alien invasion, but I don't even know if they'll do that. But
Right.
there's got to be a reason why they're suddenly, you've ridiculed these. It would be very similar to if all of a sudden you had the mainstream media saying, well, of course Oswald didn't do it, out of nowhere, when they've been ridiculing people forever. And that's at that level, suddenly say, yeah, of course, UFOs should be taken seriously. Well, why weren't they taken seriously for the last, 70 years?
That's a
What's
fair
different
point.
now?
And I'm sorry to keep, but why don't you believe in aliens anymore?
Well, I have doubts. I have doubts about space. I have doubts about our reality, and
Love it.
so I believe. I had a flat Earth guy on my show last
I
week.
saw. That's why I'm bringing this up because I saw
Yeah,
on
so,
your saw.
yeah. I mean, so and I people ask me. I don't know what I believe, but I do know I have serious doubts that we're on a giant spinning ball, and I don't trust science. My study of the Apollo missions, I pretty much is convinced me we definitely didn't go to the moon. So they're lying about a lot of stuff, and I used to be a huge fan of astronomy. I used to follow the space program a lot as a little kid. I knew all their names. I knew very knowledgeable about it. So, and I look at my telescope and try to see the moons of Jupiter and all that, the rings of
Right.
Saturn, and all that. And so it was hard for me to break away from that. But I think that just the fact that we're being lied to about everything, and that's why I'm open-minded. And as I've told people, why would you think that they're lying to you about everything else, but they're telling you the truth about the nature of reality of our world? And so
Mm,
I'm open to hollow Earth, flat Earth, whatever, a computer simulation.
mhm.
I mean, all of it. I'm open to any of it because I think the reality they've constructed, the Big Bang evolution thing, is designed to take God out of the equation. It's also designed to minimize the value of every human life because it makes us into just a random set of genes that it really is not important at all. We're like worker bees, in an ant
Right.
colony or something. And so it takes, I think, the special equation out of what I think human life is special. And so I resent, being, claimed I'm just a speck or something. But
Absolutely.
I think that's what they're trying to do.
I like it. So I'm sure you're familiar with Ken to me, but Ken had he brought that up a long time ago. He told me how it's interesting that alien encounters, they always have like a few messages: peace on earth, stop fighting, a one world government, a one world religion. So it's,
Yes.
what are the coincidences that these aliens, they have the same beliefs as the NWO does, or all these elite men?
Yeah. Earthlings, you must stop. You must sacrifice your hot shower and SUVs. Climate change, stop racism now. The universe is very upset at white
Right.
supremacy,
Right.
it's
So you're
ridiculous.
not a fan of David Wilcock or Corey Good?
No, I don't. And again, somebody who's when I was reading about UFOs, even when I still kind of was open to the extraterrestrial, hypothesis, I was already starting to turn to the books of Charles Fort, and I think they're some of the greatest books ever written. Book of the Damned, Low,
Mhm.
and Fort was very skeptical about everything, but he was the only man of his time, and really any time that was because he was kind of a mainstream guy. They had the Fortean Society that was a lot of big writers at the time because he was so brilliant, supported him. But he's the one that just really just kind of deconstructed science. He would make fun of the astronomers and show how wrong they were on all their predictions back then. I mean, they were wrong constantly. And they
Right.
would just, make up absurd excuses the same way they would now because they're wrong constantly now. I mean, meteorologists are wrong all the time. So I,
Mhm.
I don't have respect for people that like this. They're not special. And the last scientist that I would have had respect for was the great Nikola Tesla. Since
Oh,
then, no, not so much. Bill Nye, the non-science guy. Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm not taking advice from those guys. I think I know about what's going on than they do.
right. Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think you bring up a good point though, like how it was mocked incessantly for years, for decades. And then now, ever since that Commander Fravor, he was on Joe Rogan. I think that's his name, Commander Fravor. But that
Mhm.
video of I forget what they called that. That's the UFO or whatever. But it was everywhere and it was being accepted. And
Mhm.
anytime, just like you said, the media accepts or pushes a narrative immediately, you can guarantee it's probably a lie or a stretch of the truth or whatever.
Right. And those I haven't seen any videos that were any more impressive than the ones I saw back in the 70s or the 80s. Home videos or home movies or certainly photographs, and none of that was ever good enough back
Mhm.
then. They just scoffed at it. And you had airline pilots back then. You had lots of military personnel. You had a guy, I can't remember his name. I used to remember all this minutia. Some guy that Unsolved Mysteries had a story about him probably back in the 60s, 70s that disappeared while he disappeared, vanished while and he was reporting. He saw one of these huge craft and he was like, he was trying to get away from it. And, they just poo pooed it and shoved it
Right.
down the memory hole. And now we're supposed to believe that this is maybe they'll start talking about, Roswell, the alien autopsies and all that. Again, all this stuff they ridiculed. Maybe now they'll just open up
Well,
about that.
well, isn't the first, I think the first like mainstream alien sighting was in 47, right
Yes.
before the CIA started. It was an
Yes.
OSS guy. It was some like,
Kenneth Arnold. Yeah. Yeah.
oh, you know better. Yeah. And they found he was like his buddy was on a boat or whatever. Like the whole story was all
Yeah.
surrounded with feds, like,
Yeah.
or intelligence
It
officers.
was, but and that's the first modern. He's the one that gave birth to the term flying saucer to the like flying saucer, and that was the modern age. But you had again Charles Fort documented many before that. Oh, he didn't call them UFOs because they haven't invented the term yet. But he was definitely describing them. And then you had one of my favorite topics, the great airship mystery of I think it was 1896, where
I
you
don't
had
know that.
all across. Oh yeah, you had all across the country people reported seeing this kind of a Zeppelin type craft, of which, of course, hadn't been invented yet. And they
Okay.
called them airships. And I mean, scores of sightings all across the country. And you had people, it landed, and you had people interacting with their human. They were absolutely human. In fact, the one guy kept giving his name, his last name, and it was the same to witness. I've forgotten the details of this.
Yeah. Right.
If I write a book about it, I'll get it. But look it up. It's a great airship. I think it was 1896. So this stuff has been going on, and it's all part of the type of phenomena that Charles Fort discovered, which is the falls from the sky of toads and blood and fish and rocks, lizards, things like that have happened for a long time,
Mhm.
and science just completely covers it up and makes up nonsensical excuses. So I think there's a lot about our world that we don't know, and that's why I think I resent science so much because science pretends that it does know. And they ridicule the Garden of Eden, they ridicule creation by a creator, but they're telling us that everything began with a giant ball that just came from nowhere and then it
Right.
exploded and created the universe. I mean, come on. And you really think that's more logical, more scientific?
Well, there was a good the Who Built the Moon. Have you ever read that? I think Alan. I forget. I'm forget. David Icke used to reference him a lot, but
Mhm.
says like how the moon, like the chances of the size, the where it's low,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
all the mathematical like numbers, like it's 1/40th the size of the sun, so it looks
Mhm.
but it's 40 times closer than the sun, so they look the
Mhm.
same. All
Mhm.
these things, they just like it's the perfection of it is just it's one in trillions the odds of this happening.
Absolutely, yeah, and again, that's why I think, either you that have a creator, a perfect creator that can do that, or, yeah, somebody
Yeah.
built it and it's artificial, I mean, they used to have a lot of astronomers that thought that, there was a whole school of thought that, Mars, the 2 moons there, Deimos and I can't remember, Deimos and
Phobos, I
Phobos.
think, something
Yeah,
like that.
Phobos, yeah, that, a lot of people that used to be a thought group there that they were artificial, uh,
Interesting.
and the satellites, but I don't know. Again,
Yeah.
there's so much up there that, but now having the way I look at the world now, like I said, is space just a giant myth? I don't know, because I was telling the flat Earth guy, although I said, he went right to flat Earth.
Right,
I
right.
said, it's not that much of a step once you realize that we didn't go to the moon. And they're lying to you about that, then and once you really analyze what's going on in the space station, which never goes anywhere near space, well,
Mhm.
the space station, it doesn't go anywhere near space. And if it's even up there, people that
Right.
believe it's not even there, it's all contrived fake. But you look at their absurd videos, the woman's hair standing up like Bride of Frankenstein, and just
Mhm.
ridiculous stuff. Where do they go to the bathroom when they're up there for months? Where does all that go? Is it all really floating around in space? I mean, you ask the logistics if you question it, and they just they don't want to hear that because they don't
No,
want people questioning the narrative. But there's a lot to question there.
I totally agree. So, my last before we get to like the mainstream topics, I'm bringing this up because you mentioned airships, and that's a big theory in Tartaria. So I wanted to get your take on because I respect your opinion literally so much. I'm sure you're familiar with the Tartaria theory and all this stuff like that. What and airships are big in that theory. That's why I'm bringing this up. But
Well,
what's
you have to familiar what I've heard of Tartaria, but I don't know much about it. What
well,
exactly?
just all the old beautiful architecture that we have that was built up until
Yes,
1850. It was
yes,
from a previous either previous or knowledge that we've lost or previous
yes.
civilization, global civilization, and
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
So I just
I hadn't heard it called Tartaria, but I'm familiar with it because we have so many things that certainly the Great Pyramid. They tell you they can't build it now.
yes,
Yeah, so how do they carry stones that weighed tons back in those days over bodies of water and stuff, and
yeah,
but don't that slaves, thousands of slaves over 20 years. And there were some really impressive slaves. I think things like the Nazca Lions in Peru,
mhm,
they can only be seen from a great height.
yeah,
I mean, they're figures, very intricately drawn figures, but they mean nothing if you're on the ground.
mhm, right,
So again, I mean, does it really take that much thought?
yeah,
Question. Well, obviously somebody must have been seeing them from a height.
mhm,
Right? So there's lots of evidence in the record there that they found ancient batteries. They found little figurines that look exactly like modern aircraft. They found things like bullet holes in dinosaurs, supposedly that kind of thing, bullet holes in cavemen.
yeah,
Uh, but they just these things just get thrown out because and that's what Charles Ford called the dam. Read the book of the dam. The dam, they don't fit in, so they're damned, and so they basically throw them down the memory hole. There's a lot we don't know, and these jokers, these are the same people that conspire against us all the time, and they're up to political subterfuge. So I'm sure not going to believe anything they have to say about the nature of
right, yeah, and just like all these or a American Historical Association, medical, all of them are started by the same Rockefeller funded.
reality.
So it's definitely there's very little truth that's if any coming out of mainstream sources. But
Right.
so to change topics, you are the Civil War master in my mind, at least. I think many would agree. But I'm on like a 3-part series of the history of central banking, and basically it starts from Roman times to like current times of how usury has destroyed just enslaved humanity essentially. And he brought up after your book that I was a big anti-Lincoln guy, and I still kind of am, But he brought up this point about how Lincoln, and you mentioned this in your book, he put out the greenbacks,
Right.
which were going to help, it's not good for central banking. So why
Right.
would Lincoln, as a tyrant, a guy who went way above his power level, he changed the presidency, why would he do something good, I guess?
Yeah, it really it is kind of an anomaly there. And before I started hating on Lincoln, when I actually looked at his record, when I was just looking at his assassination, yeah, I thought, and I've seen that quote from the London Times supposedly or something about if this mischievous financial policy of printing the green books, basically it's so dangerous that person will be that country will be the most. Basically, it's basically saying he had to be killed. But I've never been able to source it. It's quoted in a lot of books, and I can't find the original source for it. They say it was in some newspaper, but I can't find. I even wrote to the to someone in England trying to find if they had a record of this old. And there's no record of it. So I don't know if that really happened, but on the surface, it certainly looks like he was really going after the bankers. But Lincoln's whole career contradicts that because he was a banker's man.
Right.
He's always supported a central bank. So why he did this, I suspect it was more of a personal thing where he, for whatever reason, he was upset at the way it was being financed, or maybe they wanted to, suddenly charge him higher interest or something, and he just said, F it, but I don't know. I'm just speculating because Lincoln's entire career is contradicted by that. But
Right.
maybe he had an epiphany and he decided to. He felt guilty about all the tyranny was thrown on people. I really don't know, but he and certainly he did. He was killed. After that, and that's the only reason I can see why they would have killed him because he had been doing their bidding. So
yeah.
It's possible. And of course, then one of the things Lincoln and Kennedy had in common that aren't usually they come up with a bunch of fake stuff they have in common, like assuming Booth and Oswald did it, but in this case, Kennedy did print silver certificates as well, which was very close to the greenback, and he was assassinated shortly after that too. So that's one thing they do have in common.
And then I agree with, I think I don't, the speculation is maybe he had a change of heart. Maybe he said, Jesus, I am slaughtering women and children for what? But then he wrote a Jesuit book, Tupper Saucy. And he taught, I don't know if you've ever read his, it's a good one, but he brings up the point that the South was funded by the Jesuits and by the Catholic Church. And so I just wanted your take on why would, again, I know you're going to have to speculate, but why would the Jesuits be against a guy that's leading to more of a global or all the power in one position, taking rights, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, the reason why everything I write about, I never point the finger at any group because I don't, and the Jesuits are kind of a quasi-Jewish group in terms of if you read what people that think it's the Jesuits that are behind everything, almost word for word, these are the things that have been said about Jews. Very, very similar. Yeah. And so a lot of the people that you described, that the Jesuits are plotting this, the Catholic Church, whatever. And the Jesuits, although they're really not, the Catholic Church is kind of different, separate from the Jesuits, but the Jesuits kind of a more radical sect. So I wouldn't, lots of people, and I'm very well aware that in the Lincoln assassination, a lot of people think the Jesuits killed him. That's one of the most popular theories. But, I think it was an inside job. I think it was, his Secretary of War, Stanton, who was a psychopath.
Right.
For whatever reason, they engineered it. And, the other version is maybe Lincoln really did mean to not treat the South as harshly. Maybe they wouldn't have had the terrors of Reconstruction with him. I don't know. It's possible. But that could be it, that they didn't want that. They wanted him further punished. You throw the greenback thing in there, maybe that's what, why they killed him. But he certainly looked like he'd been doing their bidding. And anyway, you look at it, he transformed the presidency for the worse and set all these awful precedents. And, it's hard for me even still writing about Lincoln because Lincoln, I used to love Lincoln. I read tons of stuff on him, and I was into his conspiracy for a long, I thought he was a good guy, and they knocked him off because of that. And then I started, reading Thomas D. Lorenzo's books and looking at the other side.
Check that out.
Oh yeah, he's Lincoln Unmasked, the real Lincoln. He wrote, and he's really the guy that started the modern kind of revisionist look on Lincoln, and he got a lot of play. He was on C-SPAN. I think he was on a couple of shows. The court historians really went after him, and
Uh,
but he's the one that pointed out the. He also has written some good stuff on Jefferson and Hamilton too. And he used to correspond with me. Now I keep trying to get him on my show. He won't answer me anymore. I don't know. Maybe he thinks I'm too radical. I said, I talk you up all the time, dude. I mean, on Coast to Coast, I've mentioned him. I
right.
always say he's an influence, but I don't know. It's not enough to get an answer from him.
What is your and then I want to talk about more current events, but what is your take on the founding? Like, I'm at this point where I think I told you last show, I've like been gravitating to thinking a monarchical form of government might have been the best. And so at the founding fathers, I'm just like struck because clearly maybe like some of them had good intentions, but so many were Freemasons, so many were
Right.
deists. I mean,
Right.
clearly, like they made things clear, but also in a way that maybe they thought it was clear enough. I don't know. But things clearly,
Mm-hmm.
this republics clearly do not work out. If you want a solid,
Right.
I mean, they're every one of them has failed. So, what is
Right.
your take, like, on the founding? Were they good guys? Were they wanting the best, or was it a scam?
Well, I'm biased because as a little kid, I fell in love with that era of history.
Yeah.
And I still have something in my heart. I mean, I'm aware of the DS thing. I'm aware of the Freemasons and the prevalence of that. And even somebody like Thomas Jefferson, who I really love and still
Yeah.
adore, I'm aware that he had a dark side too. He was sympathetic to Adam Weishaupt, Illuminati.
No way. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, I mean, he just thought because Jefferson was, I think he was a believer in God. I'm not sure, but Jefferson like rewrote the Bible with stuff,
Yes, he
that kind of
did. Yeah.
ridiculous stuff. So he was a real too much maybe an incredible free thinker, but Weishaupt he looked at as somebody that was maybe going to just was a free thinker himself, and he was poking holes in organized religion, which he hated, and in the state. So I guess he thought that was a good thing. He didn't really understand what the conspiratorial implications were. But I I probably would have been on the side of people that like Patrick Henry and initially George Mason and Thomas Paine and Jefferson, who none of them supported the Constitution,
Mhm.
and because they thought the art of and I've gotten to discussions with many people that the Articles of Confederation actually were probably better,
Mhm.
superior than what we had. But the only thing that made the Constitution, as the Constitution developed, once you put that Bill of Rights in there, and you have the separation of powers, if they had actually been separated and it worked the way they're supposed to, then I think it's about as perfect a form of government as you could have. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the anarchy position too, because all authority appears to be corrupt, and as a populist, the essence of populism is we're against giving too much power concentrated in any one place, and the separation of powers really addresses that because the idea was really great of Madison's to have three separate and equal branches that would check each other, checks and
Mhm.
balances. And the Bill of Rights protected, because it did give this, the Articles of Confederation people thought that, the Constitution gave the central government too much power. But, look at it compared to now. I mean, it was really stripped down. It had very few functions. Ironically, regulating money and printing and regulating money, the value thereof, one of the few functions that Skip they've never done.
Right. Yeah.
They gave that to a private corporation, the Federal Reserve, eventually. But and I'm finishing up Hidden History 3, more from the
Oh,
Orwellian
oh,
American memory hole. Yeah, that's so I'm pretty much done. I'm just putting finishing touches on it and then send it to the publisher and hope they'll publish it. If not, I'll have to find alternatives. But
right.
I, I'm I'm going back into the founding fathers there, and a lot of stuff, a lot of JFK, 9/11, Oklahoma City, a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
Making more Lincoln, more
Oh,
because
I
you
love
didn't
it,
get enough.
dude. I love it.
Um,
I can't wait.
but I discovered in there that Jefferson, another reason to love him is that he was really the first and maybe only high profile opponent of judicial review, and that's the first shattering. Wasn't Lincoln wasn't actually the first one to shatter the checks and balances. That was John Marshall, who the
Mm.
first Supreme Court Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He just decided to take on this function for the judiciary of a judicial review, where they were going to review all questions regarding the Constitution. That was not their purpose, and Jefferson was incensed about that. And they were not supposed to have that big of a role. And of course, what that led to is what we see. Eventually, you're talking about by 1973 or whatever it was, then you had something like Roe versus Wade, which is a culmination of that, where you had them interpreting something that was not even mentioned in the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution about it. The founding fathers couldn't even envision something like that. So, and that's what you get. And then you have things like, something like when the people do get it up amongst themselves to pass a good referendum, like a Proposition 187 back in the early 90s in California passed, which would have denied government benefits to illegal aliens, which would have been a great way to get self-deportation going, since immigration authorities weren't doing it. If you deny them benefits, there's going to be a lot of people deporting themselves.
Yes.
And what happens? It goes to a federal judge, just takes it and throws it out. And that's judicial review. And people in both sides support it. The conservatives support it because they're hopeful they'll get a judge that'll help them. It's not the way it's supposed to work. And power to the people. So referendums, things like that could be great to try to circumvent some of the stuff, but not if it's going to be subject to judicial review. So I'm fighting that judicial review concept with all I can, but it's so ingrained now in our culture. So that was the first corruption of what I think was a great system. And then, of course, the second corruption was when the executive branch under Lincoln usurped all the authority. You became the imperial president, trampled all over the Constitution, and no one really objected. Became the greatest, the secular saint of our civilization. So
I like that.
He's a fitting saint for this kind of this crumbling civilization, because he's the one that set us down this path. And then he started all the precedents that you would see later in Woodrow Wilson, Franklin D. Roosevelt, all the modern presidents. And if anybody, like right now, if anybody would question them about the January 6th political prisoners, which is an outrage, but it harkens back to what Lincoln did when he arrested all those northern prisoners. And so if anyone, but you're not having any opposition. There is no ACLU. The ACLU is not saying anything. Nobody's saying anything. But if they did mount a legal challenge, that would be their defense. They would cite the precedents of Lincoln. What's an insurrection? This is an insurrection. And they'd probably win in court because our courts are completely corrupted.
Well, so that's, I want to talk, but that's why, like, this happened in Rome. The Republic started out great. They had honest senators who represented their people. And it just seems to be, whether it's just human nature or it's by design, republics get corrupted. And Caesar saved Rome for a little bit, and that this story just repeats itself over and over again, where the Republic gets corrupted. And that's why I'm very disillusioned with, democracy and republics.
I don't blame you. It's very disillusioning, but and that's why the only way, like Jefferson said, need to bind man down with chains, from the Constitution, because he's going to cause a lot of mischief, as he called it. With if you give them too much power. You had Lord Acton, one of the great minds of the 19th century, Lord Acton from England, great populist, who was a good friend of Robert E. Lee, by the way, and was rooting for the Confederacy in the Civil War. And that's the side liberty was on. And he's the one that came up with one of the great sayings of all time, and that's power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. The more power you give anyone, and that's why I say it wouldn't matter if you, me, Thomas Jefferson, anybody. You can't give Huey Long, my all-time hero. You can't give any one person or any one group, any one organization, any one thing too much power. You have to have something to check it. So I think the founders really came up with something brilliant to have three separate and equal branches that could check each other. And if they functioned right, they would. The problem is judicial took on too much authority right away. The executive kind of goes back and forth. Every president that's ranked highly is an imperial president.
Right. Absolutely.
How
does that happen?
Yeah, exactly. The court historians love that. They love you to trample on the Constitution. Right. But the legislative branch, we've never had a runaway legislative branch. The legislative branch is the weakest far. They haven't declared war since World War II. It's supposed to be their constitutional authority. They did nothing when Lincoln was in office. Nobody protests anything. And the legislative branch now is just as bad as the other two, but they're not. They're the weakest. And they're the ones that are most responsive to the people, because especially the House of Representatives, you could theoretically overturn it every 2 years.
Yeah.
So that's the closest we have. And so it's if anything, that should be the strongest of any of their strongest, but it's by far the weakest. And so we have the mess we have right now, where basically it's up to you have these partisan politics, these two awful, putrid, Republicrats that you have, the terrible woke Democrats and the woke Democrats and the stupid cuck Republicans who,
Right.
just don't just betray people time and time again. And then you have the presidents who are, can write executive orders and all this stuff that they're not supposed to be able to do constitutionally. And then you have the judicial system, which is completely politicized now and is on steroids. They literally think they can do anything, and they'll just you get a good referendum up, you pass something that would help the people, throw it right out, send it to the wrong judge, and that's what we saw even with Trump. The few good things he tried to do, they would go to a federal judge and he'd overturn them. And that's not the way a democracy or a constitutional republic. It's not the way it's supposed to work. So it's right now, I'd be open to anything, but if you're replaced with a monarchy, then you have, a bunch of inbreds, probably half reptilians. And I don't know. I don't know if that's any kind of an improvement.
Well, I want either King Alfred, I want him, or the Sun King, King Louis of France. He's on my list. I'd bring
King
him
Arthur.
back.
How about King Arthur?
King Arthur. Maybe real. I'd bring him too.
Yeah, if he was real, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks. So I wanted your take last topic before I wanted to talk about your new book. Elon Musk, Twitter. What is your take on this whole crazy situation? Because obviously we saw Elon today, like halted his purchase. Those I have the Project Veritas. Did you see those the Project Veritas clips?
I didn't watch them, but I saw them advertised on. I guess they're So
basically, it's nerds. They have like an attractive woman, So guys, if you are in a position of power and a girl way out of your league is flirting with you, she does not like you. All right. Okay. She is using you for some reason. Just have to throw that out there. But yeah, so basically it came out, like the one guy, he said how, we don't make any money. We have lost money every year, but we're an ideological company. That's our job. It's not to make money. So that was an interesting quote. But what's your take on this on Musk, Twitter, all this stuff?
Well, I caught some flack when it first came out because I'm aware of Elon Musk's history. I've seen the pictures of him with Ghislaine Maxwell. I've seen his mother, and his wives, and I'm aware of the bizarre stuff in his background. Sure, of course, but he was saying, again, much like Trump was, he was saying the right things. He was, free speech is important. I said, I don't see how he could make Twitter worse. How could he do that? So I said, if he really brings back, and I've been testing it. I don't tweet enough. So I've been testing. I try to be provocative in my tweets. I need to start putting Pizzagate and Sandy Hook stuff up and see what happens. But I mean, so far, there are election fraud stuff or COVID stuff,
right.
But things that get you into. But so far, so good. And supposedly people that were banned, they claim their accounts have been restored. I don't know, but now you're hearing stuff. Maybe he won't even own it. But I said, however it works, yes, he's not my idea of some kind of heroic figure, and he almost certainly is one of them. Anybody that has that kind of wealth, there's got to be a great crime behind that kind of great fortune.
Oh, and I like that. That's a nice quote.
Well, that's I think it was was it the Balzac? I think it was the French author that said, "Behind every great fortune lies a great crime," and I think that it definitely does. And in case when it's that great of a fortune, when you're talking about one of the richest ones, billions, then something obviously is up there. But if he brings some semblance of free speech to one social media platform, even we have one place we can go where we don't have to worry about getting banned. We can say, anything we want. That's a good thing. I'm a free speech purist now. I'm dubious, and now hearing this stuff that maybe won't buy it. Everything's pretty predictable.
Yeah.
But it did, much like Trump's stupid tweets served one good purpose. They brought the roaches out in the light. It showed, exactly how anti-liberty most of America is. And so just the idea Elon Musk's threat of bringing free speech to Twitter, horrified all these people. So you saw, especially these journalists. These journalists were shaking in their boots, quivering in fear at the prospect of free speech. Oh my God, this is horrible. A journalist. So it was very illuminating to see that. So I don't think he'll do it, but hey, whatever. If you said I would root on it. And Joe Biden pardoned Abraham Bolden, the Secret Service agent with the JFK assassination. And
I didn't know
okay,
that. Wow.
yeah, I said, okay, so Biden did one good thing amazingly. I don't know what possessed him to do it, but Trump didn't pardon him.
Right.
So
I don't know his story. What's
he
what's
was the
this guy?
first. He was the first Black Secret Service agent appointed by Kennedy, and after JFK died, he was the only one really to talk out about the Secret Service pretty much letting it happen. They railroaded him and put him in jail for a while under bogus
No
bribery.
way.
Yep, and he was never. He's been trying to get a pardon for a long time. He's pretty old now, and to my shock, Joe Biden of all people pardoned him. So you give the devil their due. Anybody that they said if they do something, I don't care. DeSantis, he's done some decent things. My governor here in Virginia, who I know is a typical rhino neocon
Right.
youngkin.
Right.
So far, he's held pretty well, better than anybody thought with the critical race theory stuff in the schools, which is one of the things he ran on. So I give anybody credit if they do the right thing. I don't necessarily look, if Hillary Clinton, came out tomorrow and demanded an investigation into the JFK assassination. Okay, well, she's right. I question why she's doing it, but so yeah, I just look at it like that. You support right, you support whoever does something right, although you're very dubious about why they're doing it. So Elon Musk becoming probably a gimmick. Maybe he's trying to enter politics too, and he thinks free speech is a
That's fair.
good thing to hang his hat on, and it is. But if anybody that actually brings free speech and stops canceling people, it's a good thing.
I don't know. I think that's I respect your opinion. You've been studying this so long. So you've seen so many and the CIA intelligence, they're not good with coming up with new ideas. They do the same thing, just, put a new name on it.
Yep.
And so I respect your opinion a lot for seeing this. And then you brought up the journalists, how you saw they were all, I mean, it's sickening. It's truly disgusting. You think that there was ever a time in America where the press was predominantly honest, was predominantly not controlled by financial interest? Or do you think, 90% there's truth in what they say, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty much always been that way. But before you had the electronic media taking over, when it was just print media, I think it was freer, definitely, because then they had to pay a more of attention to the freedom of the press. But what the problem again when radio was the first radio and film, when those first mediums of expression that the founders couldn't have foreseen. So they really should have amended the Bill of Rights just to include, radio, television, and all future forms of communication. But instead, what they did is they created the FCC and to regulate the airways.
Right.
And again, there was nobody that protested it. So, and you theoretically still had, a free print media. Publishers used to publish more, controversial stuff, bigger publishers. And somebody published Charles Fort in the 1920s. But and you had like people like Harry Elmer Barnes, he's the one I credit. He's the one that came up with the term court historians, which I use all the time. And this was a guy who was a typical historian who was, so anti-German. He was rah-rahing World War I, but he had some kind of a sea change in the mid 1920s, and he just went 180 degrees in the other direction. But his writings, at least for a while, basically blaming the Allies for World War I and things, they saying we were too
He
rough
was
on
right.
Germany. Exactly, and he he had big publishers for a while. He was still welcomed in all the biggest organs of the mainstream media, and of course, eventually, by the time World War II, especially, really changed everything because that's when they really, really shut down on dissent. Started to, and you already had radio that was the rare radio. You had Father Coughlin and people like that in the 30s that were really they were talking about Jews and everything. They were really extreme.
Right. Right.
But eventually, once World War II came along, all that stopped. And after World War II, you did not have those kinds of books that might have been published before. They were relegated to really, Sons of Liberty in Louisiana, presses like that you had to buy through the mail. You couldn't find these books in the library.
Right.
And newspapers, you didn't have. You had like the Chicago Tribune that was still kind of conservative, but they did, it wasn't any real alternative. And of course, you had the FCC regulating. So there was never, and that's why when the JFK assassination happened, then you saw first that, boy, this is going to be a lockstep. And you saw the way all the television networks reacted the same, all the print media, and you really saw, wow, there's just a real consensus of thought, because that had, and again, it started with World War II.
Yeah.
World War I, not so much. There was questioning of World War I. World War II, no. They didn't have to worry about throwing a bunch, like they threw a bunch of World War I protesters in prison. World War II, yeah. Nobody, because they saw what happened to World War I protesters, so nobody protested, basically.
Right.
And they weren't going to tolerate it. So
except Jeanette Rankin.
Oh, like wonderful. Yeah, my hero. If they should put any female on the currency. That's your number one seed, but I'm sure she was never even mentioned. Yeah, it's a wonderful. I mean, anybody that said something like you can no more. What do you say? You can no more win a war than you could win an earthquake. I think it was one of her great, which is a true. Yeah.
Yeah, and for people, Jeanette Rankin was a congressman, Minnesota.
Was it Minnesota? I think you could be right. I think so.
But regardless, she was, I think, one of like maybe the only one or one of like three that voted against both World War I and World War II.
She was the only one. In World War II, she was the only one.
Oh wow, World War II. She was. I thought as in World War I. I think Lindbergh also voted no.
Yeah, Lindbergh. There was not many, but I forget the exact number. It might have been like 10.
Yeah, not many.
Not many, but World War I won.
And she is just so amazing that, I mean, as a woman in this time, she stood up to have the bravery to say, I mean, just so people know, just such an amazing. So I totally agree. If you're going to put any woman on a dollar bill or, Women's History Month highlighting amazing women, she's top of the list.
She's not going to make it. No, because what was her key issue? Peace, and peace isn't popular to the left or the right. So and that's the kind of people I write about in my book.
Yeah.
So,
So tell everybody about. I know I just bought it before I did. We had this. I saw it. You had a deal on it on Kindle, $2. So you guys cannot go wrong. Just buy his book. Start reading. But what's your new book?
You mean you mean Survive the Richest you bought for Joe?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Well, I hope you like that. And that's a real important one now. But the latest book is about showbiz, on borrowed fame, money, mysteries, and corruption in the entertainment world, and a little bit of a departure for me, but not really, because I wrote a book about bullying before that, Bullyocracy. I write about other things, but it's always about exposing corruption and injustice and unfairness, and in show business, there's a lot of corruption, and you have the same kind of unnatural deaths you have in the political world. There's a huge body count in the entertainment industry.
Yes.
And so it's so I go and so it kind of combines my hidden history books with the unnatural deaths and the corruption, and Survival of the Richest with the economic disparity, because you have all over the place where some of these very famous people really got ripped off. They didn't make much money. Others, made 300 million, and there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason after who got screwed and why. So I'm fascinated by that stuff, and hopefully people will be too.
No, I wonder. So I saw this one. There's people on Twitter. Obviously, they're a little. We call it like schizo posting or whatever. They're a little crazier, but they're enjoyable to read. And one guy brought up the connection of how like every celebrity, almost not every, but the producers and these writers of these shows, oftentimes their parents were either in Hollywood or they were a politician or they were an Ivy League. And a lot of them come from these Ivy League schools. Like the example he gave was The Office. For people that Ryan in The Office, he went to Harvard. His dad was someone super powerful, BJ Novak, I think that's his name. But he brought this point that like his dad's such a powerful guy, Ivy League. And there's just so many examples of this, people that write influential shows that their parents come from. So if you could elaborate on that, I'd love to hear.
Well, and that's really more, survival of the richest. I go over that a lot, and I have a whole section. Actually, I think they actually cut that out of the published version. So you might have to go to my blog. My blog is at donaldjeffries.news and search for it because I have deleted chapters from Hidden History and Survival of the Richest.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. I've been there, but I never know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So you can find because I thought it was the best chapter in the book, and they cut it out. I don't know if they were afraid of being sued or whatever, but I just went over all the celebrities and from the entertainment world, the political world, business, high profile CEOs. And I just looked at, and I by no means was it, extensive as it could have been. There's tons and tons of other examples I could have given, but virtually almost every case, every one of these people, if they became famous in the high profile occupation, they started out in life at least upper middle class. Most of the time they started out very wealthy. I mean, tons and tons of people in Hollywood, even old Hollywood, their fathers were judges or U.S. senators. Tootle the Bankhead's father was a Speaker of the House of Representatives. Doctors, things like Humphrey Bogart was raised with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was like a baby model. His mother was a high profile figure when mothers weren't working, which is later Bill Gates. Bill Gates' mother was sitting on the boards of directors of banks and corporations back in the 50s and 60s.
I didn't know that. Wow.
His father was president of Planned Parenthood too.
I saw that. Yeah.
And he had, bank presidents as grandparents. And he was some middle class. That's a special breed of middle class there. But if he's middle class, but
I got to change my groupings.
Yeah, the rest of us are in poverty. But yeah, so you can find tons of examples there, and I list them, a bunch of them, and it just to show you again that and that's the theme of Survival of the Richest is the system is rigged. There's almost no upward mobility, and I have tons and tons of statistics there to show that. It's basically the sad, and this was before the COVID narrative hit and the unconstitutional lockdown, which just made everything way worse. Already was bad. But even before that, it was almost a rule of thumb, unless you're like you could play sports, and maybe sports are to a lesser degree entertainment, and that really most of that only plays to the black audience because a lot of them were disproportionately poor. But general rule of thumb that is, if you start out in life poor, you're pretty much going to die poor. You might get you have a little bit more money, but you're not going to raise up. You might go up one quadrille. So if you're in the bottom quadrille, you might go up to the next to the bottom quadrille.
Right. Yeah.
Start out middle class, you might go up one quadrille again, maybe. And if you're wealthy, you're not going to go down. It's impossible. And you probably, you could be a screw up. A lot of the sons and daughters of the one percenters, they resent it. They're messed up, being raised by nannies. They turn to drugs or, things like that. So a lot of times they go through their monies. Their parents have tough love with them. So some of them don't end up, it's because of that. If they play the game and don't do that, they're going to be wealthy, even wealthier probably. So, if people like, Bill Gates started out, he got wealthier. Donald Trump, was the son of a millionaire, became a billionaire. So, as Gerald Celebs likes to say, these guys, they start out on third base, like start out in life in third base, they think they hit a home run.
Yeah.
And that's basically the way it is. The system is rigged, and it's sad but true. That's just, I wish it wasn't, but there are very few. Even when you look at like really good looking actresses in Hollywood, you figure, well, okay, they maybe they were runaways, and they were obviously some producer wanted to have sex with them.
Right.
But even most of them came from successful families. Most of them, not all, but most of them did. So even that way, they could be sexy and whatever, but they still, usually needed to start out from a good economic foothold.
Right. No, I totally agree. There's exceptions to every rule, but as general, it seems that all these people are very connected.
Yes.
And they're just running a whole scam on all of us because and I always thought about this too. Like people say, oh, they're such a good actor. I feel like acting, I look at acting, I'm like, I feel like I could do that too. Like, this isn't too challenging. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to act.
Right.
But there had to be something more at play that besides skill of acting and who gets hired for jobs and things
Sure,
like
and
that.
they make those. You know, when I was the first thing I want, well, yeah, I always wanted to be some kind of writer, but when I was a teenager, I was writing songs all the time. I
Yeah,
really I wanted to be like a singer songwriter,
right.
and so I didn't even have extensive recording, but I had a friend that has really good equipment and just something like Echoplex. I don't know if they still use that, but like he made a tape of me where they put the Echoplex on. It sweetens and maybe sound completely different.
Mhm.
And it made me sound a lot better.
Right,
And
right.
so they can do that stuff with almost everybody, anybody, because almost anybody can sing. I mean, they can't carry a tune, maybe,
Yeah.
but there's a way electronically to sweeten it, and they've
Mhm.
been doing that for a very long time. And they basically we saw that with Milli Vanilli. You remember back in the '90s where they literally found out they weren't singing. They didn't sing at all.
No
They
way.
were yeah, they were destroyed. Yeah, their careers were destroyed. But I mean, and I'm sure they're not the only ones.
Yeah,
I would I don't know the Katy Perrys of the world. I don't know how
right.
good maybe they can really sing, but yeah. So there's a lot of that out there, and it's. But I agree with you in terms of acting, and I've seen tons of actors like yeah, I think I could do a better job than that too. But it is what I mean. People even classic acts like Marlon Brando. I never got him.
Right.
James Dean especially, just mumbling constantly and brooding. It's like I don't get it. I guess maybe it was appealing at the time. I don't know.
Right. Right. I know we're almost done. Last topic. What is your take on what's going on in Russia and Ukraine? I would love your because I'm just my point of view is every war has been funded on both sides by the bankers since
Yeah.
Civil War, maybe not the Boer War, but everything else they played both sides against the middle.
Yeah.
So, what is your take though on what's going on? Where is this leading? Is this a psyop for hunger strikes? What is it?
Well, yeah, of course, obviously, I think it's none of our business. And I told people early on, I said, look, I mean, yeah, just from the quotes I've heard from Vladimir Putin from alternative media, I don't know if they're true or not, but he's saying better stuff than our politicians. He wants to arrest the Rothschilds. He banned GMO foods. He said the government killed Kennedy. According to these quotes, I don't know. I don't speak
Right.
Russian,
Right.
but so if they're accurate, that's true. But uh, and but I said I don't care if Putin's a good guy or a bad guy. It's irrelevant to me. I don't care. Either way, I feel the same way that this is none of our business. Our country's crumbling and falling apart. We need to take care of this first. But then you get into the hoaxy aspect of it, and you have Bono, real suspect. This is a guy that runs the One Foundation. That it was exposed that 1.2% of the money that's donated to his foundation goes to causes. He has a 98.8% overhead.
Sickening.
Completely worthless foundation. Didn't shame him at all. Didn't stop the foundation. He's
Right.
still going. He's still pontificating everywhere. And he's basically just an Illuminati member posing as an alleged rock star. He's posing with George W. Bush and stuff like that. But anyhow, he goes over and does a benefit concert in the war zone. Now,
Yeah.
say how does that work? This is
Yeah.
a war, and you see all these world leaders flying in and out of the war zone. So they're in the middle of this alleged fighting. And I posted something today. I think it was today where I found these statements by Orwell, who of course I love.
Yeah.
And when Orwell's a journalist covering the war in Spain, and he talks about how he personally saw these battles, these bloody battles being reported that were never fought. And this
Wow.
is you're talking about a century ago.
Yeah.
And this guy he wasn't writing fiction; he was covering it as a journalist. And the whole thing, if you read the whole thing, I said it sounds like he's talking about hoaxes. And that
Interesting.
was then 100 years ago. So I don't even know how much. Again, I don't know how much of this stuff is real.
Mhm.
But they've already had footage caught there where they said, well, no, actually that was from 10 years ago, and
Yeah. Yeah.
purported, and you see that everywhere. You saw that during the pandemic. So
Yeah.
there's a Truman Show aspect to all this. I don't even know and you have the idea that this comedian who was on playing the Ukrainian president on TV, and now he's become the savior of Hollywood, where
Right.
they just in love with this guy, and they didn't blink when he banned all opposition political parties, and they still say we're fighting for democracy. What kind of
a great point.
democracy, doesn't allow any opponents. So, I don't know, man, but I certainly, I'm with Benjamin Franklin. He said, there's never been such a thing as a good war or a bad peace. So I'm always against war,
Yeah.
always for peace, and especially when it's that far away. Even if it's real, even if Putin is the boogeyman, I don't care. It's none of our business. America is crumbling, falling apart everywhere, literally falling apart. And you're sending $40 billion over there. It's
sickening. Sickening. Yeah.
Yes, it
well,
is.
Where can so how can people find your work? All those good things, Don. Everyone loves when you're on the show, so I just want to let you know that. But yeah, where can they
that's
find you?
very kind of you. Well, right, DonaldJeffries.media is where you can find my writings on Substack, and that's going to be my website. My friend Tony Arterburner produces my I Protest radio show on Fridays at live streams there over rockfin.com. He he's paid for the website. He's such a nice guy. He supports me so much. So DonaldJeffries.media is the URL to remember, because that's going to be my website shortly, and you'll be able to find links to everything there. Right now, though, you go there, you can find my Substack, which I'm writing on regularly. I have a pay option there, and some people are paying, even though I offer everything for free. Some people help me that way, so it's great. But so I'm getting a pretty good following there, and I have the Donald Jeffries Show, which is every Wednesday. That's on Ocelli.com. Jeff Rentz, his big network, he rebroadcasts every Donald Jeffries show like 4 times. And it also goes out to radio stations on a delayed basis, but probably at 3 a.m. I don't know. But so yeah, I guess so. If you somehow have that radio station to listen to, but you can listen to that. And then I Protest again is Fridays, and I'm on Jeff Rentz every Mondays at 9 o'clock. You can hear me a lot of places. You can read me a lot of places. It's you probably find out more than you want to know if you search for me.
No, man, you're a pillar of this truther community, and so I'll put like your website and stuff in the show notes. And everybody, thanks for listening. Great time in the chat. Thanks to Don, and we'll talk soon, everybody. Take care.